Ladies and gentlemen, we are absolutely delighted today to have Dr. Alvin Marcello from the Asia eHealth Information Network presenting to us with respect to supporting universal healthcare in the Asian area. Dr. Marcello is a general and trauma surgeon by training, and he's currently Chief Medical Information Officer at St. Luke's Medical Center and Executive Director of the Asia eHealth Information Network. Okay, he is also Director of the University of the Philippines Manila National Telehealth Center and Chief of the Medical Informatics Unit. He established the Master of Science in the Health Informatics program at the university. He has numerous certifications, many from the Open Group, and that is where essentially we first met and had the pleasure of meeting him. And we are very much looking forward to his presentation in a very complex field. So without further ado, Alvin, over to you.
Thank you, Robert, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to the people in the audience. I'm Dr. Alvin Marcello. I'd like to present our plans in our region for building digital health infrastructure in support of universal healthcare in the ASEAN. My objective is to unveil the strategies and prerequisites to kickstart a digital health program, like funding availability, partnerships at the national and regional levels. My outline will start with a brief overview of the WHO Global Strategy on Digital Health, something about the Asia eHealth Information Network, what is digital health infrastructure from our perspective, and how does it relate and how it will support universal healthcare in our region, and end up with a summary of the strategy that we call now at AeHIN as Mind the Gaps, which we think is an easy acronym for people to remember. So I start with this slide, which I think is very familiar to many of those in the health sector. It's a very complex industry. This is actually the American health sector in an infographic. And as you can see, it's very complex. Many stakeholders, many lines between the stakeholders. These represent transactions. And if you drill down on each of these lines, you will see that they have different rules and contractual arrangements with each other. It's very difficult to standardize. And although I'm presenting it as the American healthcare complexity, it's actually a very common paradigm for all of the health sectors in our region in Asia. It covers not just health, although we are looking at it from the health perspective, but in fact, there are a lot of overlaps and linkages with finance, insurance, economic development, the legal aspects like privacy and confidentiality, technology, and the workforce. And if we want to achieve universal health care or coverage for the citizens of our countries, we realized in our region that we can only make this happen if all of these stakeholders work together and have some degree of coordination. And while we know that information technology or digital health or the use of information technology in health will enable this coordination, we know that it takes a lot of effort and energy to build this digital health. And we now propose that good governance should be the foundations of this coordination. The Global Strategy on Digital Health for 2020 to 2025 was published by the World Health Organization, and it's a good starting document for something that used to be called eHealth way back in 2005, as defined in WHO as the use of ICT in healthcare, a very generic definition. But they've started to shift starting 2018 to the term digital health, and they've started to publish some guiding principles, strategic objectives, a framework for action, and an implementation of the strategy and action plan, and some guidance for monitoring and evaluation. And if you look at strategic objectives, number 3, that's where our network, the Asia eHealth Information Network, falls in, which is to strengthen governance for digital health at global, regional, and national levels. And as a matter of fact, the enterprise architecture perspective plays a big role in aligning the global, the regional, and the national initiatives towards digital health and interoperability. So who are we at the Asia eHealth Information Network? We are a group of digital health advocates from government, academe, non-government organizations, and private sector in the region. We started with 7 individuals from 6 countries, but now have expanded to more than 1,000 members with more than 20 developing partners in over 60 countries. And surprisingly, we do have members, individual members who are outside of Asia, but who happen to be working in the field of digital health development in our region. We were created by the World Health Organization in 2011. Our structure is very loose. We have the General Assembly at the top. We call it the network. And we have a central governing committee, a small group of people from different countries, 5 of us from different countries. And we have an advisory committee, which we call the Working Council. These are representatives from the countries that you see on the right. 2 representatives per country, 1 from the Ministry of Health and another from the academe or a non-government organization. And we are supported by a small secretariat, 1 in Manila and 1 in Bangkok, who help us with our day-to-day operations. Over time, we have developed special working groups with interests in research, in interoperability, and we call them all together as the Community of Interoperability Labs, or COIL. And one of those interoperability labs is the Standards and Interoperability Lab Asia, which serves as the exemplar or the reference interoperability lab for the rest of the community of interoperability labs. And I have a slide emphasizing why that reference lab plays a crucial part in the interoperability, not just within the country, but within the region. The story started in 2011 in Hoi An, Vietnam. We were gathered together by the World Health Organization, the Western Pacific Regional Office, together with USAID. And the conference title was Health Information Systems Interoperability. And as you know, WHO meetings are composed of government representatives and development partners. And together in that conference, we all agreed over the 3 days that we all wanted to have interoperability, but none of us have actually achieved it. As a matter of fact, we all agreed that it is not particularly effective to ask the private sector to interoperate with the public sector if the public sector itself is fragmented and not interoperable within each other. So in a way, that conference ended in a sad note because we all knew that we were far away from our desired interoperability, but we also left with some degree of happiness because we sort of felt like kindred spirits. We were in the same boat, tackling the same problem. Fortunately, the same group of people, more or less, was gathered again a few months later in Manila, again by the World Health Organization, and now with the Asian Development Bank. And this conference was called Asia Pacific Leadership on Health Information Systems. And on the first day of the conference, we felt, the same group of people who were there in Vietnam, we felt we were doing the same thing that we already did in Vietnam, which is analyze the situation and the problem that we already knew, that we did not have interoperability. So during the breaks on the first day, we started gathering the alumni coming from Hoi An, Vietnam, and we came together and said, we can't spend the next 3 days talking about the same things we already discussed and agreed on in Hoi An, Vietnam. We need to think forward. And during the breaks, you you get to realize that Vietnam has created a solution for this, Thailand had a solution for that, and the Philippines had something to offer in this particular area. And so we thought, why don't we form a learning network amongst ourselves? Now that we know the problem, and each of us have done some slices of success, achieved some degrees of, we have achieved something, why don't we form a learning network amongst ourselves? And we requested WHO for a small fund to do a planning meeting to launch what we will soon call a peer learning network. And that happened at the latter part of 2011 in Bangkok, Thailand, where we had our first strategic planning for AeHIN. And here we agreed, the 7 founding members, so to speak, that we need to focus on 4 strategic areas. First, we need to enhance leadership and governance for eHealth, basically accountability. Second, we need to build capacity for eHealth, civil registration, vital statistics, and health information systems. We need to nurture the exchange of knowledge, which was happening in Hoi An and in Manila. And we need to share resources. Now, the few experts in Asia that are available need to be able to help each other within the region. And we knew that we needed standards so that we can have interoperability. So these were our 4 key strategic areas. By 2012, with support from WHO, USAID, and NORAD, we had our first general meeting. And in this meeting, we agreed, these are the 4 key takeaways. The audience basically agreed with the first 7 founding members. So we had a larger group now agreeing with our vision. And then we asked for our first request from WHO and the development partners that we said, can you train us, a cohort of us, on standards and like HL7 so that we can quickly achieve interoperability? And we were able to get that grant. We invited 2 people from each country and they underwent training on HL7. Our picture in Bangkok. The next year, we met again, this time in Manila, for our second general meeting. And this was also the same time where we started to create a governance structure, the Working Council, asking for 2 representatives from each member country, one from the Ministry of Health and another from NGO or academe. And this is also when we interviewed the alumni of the HL7 course. And we said, well, last year we had you trained in HL7, so this year you would be interoperable by now. And so they said, not so fast. HL7 is just one of the many standards. They're like building blocks or hollow blocks. You need to have an enterprise architecture or a blueprint so that you know how to use the building blocks properly. And so a group of us brought our heads together and started, what is this enterprise architecture all about? So we did some research and we found TOGAF. And we said, and asked the development partners, okay, guys, we need training on enterprise architecture, TOGAF. And we sent, again, 2 people from each country to a TOGAF training. And they got certified. We were surprised. No, these are health people, not IT people, and they got certified in TOGAF. And so this is our picture in that second meeting. In the third general meeting, again, we interviewed the alumni from the TOGAF course, and we said, congratulations. You should be interoperable by now because you have enterprise architects and you already know HL7. And they said, not so fast because all of this enterprise architecture work is tedious and work intensive, and it needs to have the blessing or the seal of approval by the national leaders. We need to have governance for the enterprise architecture or the blueprint activity. And so again, we went back to the drawing board and we started doing research on what is this governance all about. And then we saw and found this training program on COVID-5. And we asked again the development partners, can we send a cohort of people on COVID-5 so that we can get to understand what it means when we talk about IT governance in support of enterprise architecture. And so we were able to get a cohort. This is our picture in the third meeting at the Asian Development Bank. And so on the fourth general meeting in Bali, Indonesia, we had those 3 cohorts already, the people trained in HL7, in TOGA, and in COVID-5. And then we were like, doing high fives and congratulating everyone that we all had, I think, all the components that we need. And then people said, well, we have people who know how to govern. And one of the first things they will govern is the enterprise architecture activity. And we all know that there are existing standards or building blocks. But do the stakeholders actually know how to read the blueprint and how to understand what their roles are in the blueprint? And do they have the execution capability to implement the projects that are assigned to them in the blueprint? And so this is where the training on project management, or Prince2, was born. And also the Bali conference, the concept of the interoperability lab, where all the different stakeholders in a country, EMR developers, health facilities, policymakers, IT companies, and academe can come together and start working on real interoperability projects. The concept of the interoperability lab was born in Bali, Indonesia. Just, the nidus of the concept. Bali, Indonesia, wonderful place. In 2017, we had our 5th AeHIN general meeting, and this is where we formed what we call the gaps framework, or what we call mind the gaps, where we encourage our membership to focus on governance, because governance will empower the architecture, give it teeth and credibility. The architecture is then fed into good people and program management, so that you have your local stakeholders capable of reading the architecture and then understanding where they are in that blueprint, and be capable of implementing their software projects or the applications within that architecture. And then the standards for interoperability are made available to the stakeholders. So we call this the Mind the Gaps framework. We wanted to heighten the sensitivity of our ministries of health to make sure that these 4 areas are covered very well. Nepidaw. By the 2018, we had our 6th meeting in Colombo, Sri Lanka, and this is where we asked 6 countries to volunteer to be the interoperability labs for their country, and together they would be called the Community of Interoperability Labs. And one of them got funding from the Asian Development Bank to be the Standards and Interoperability Lab Asia. So that was based in Manila, because the Asian Development Bank office is in Manila. So the Standards and Interoperability Lab Asia would be the exemplar, and they would develop open source tools, techniques, technologies, training programs that would then be disseminated to these in-country interoperability labs, and then they would share knowledge and share resources and form a community amongst themselves. Colombo. Of course, we were in a pandemic, so in 2021, we could only do an online meeting. And this is where we then matched what we call a group within AeHIN. Those who passed TOGAP, we formed them into a community called the Regional Enterprise Architecture Council for Health. So this is a pool of certified enterprise architects in Asia, well-versed in the health sector. And then on the other side, you would have the community of interoperability labs, or the builders, who would then get advice from the enterprise architects and start building interoperable tools and develop techniques and training programs. And this is the start of creating interoperability capability in our countries. Our dream that started with our aching problem way back in 2011 on the lack of interoperability. So in summary, in 10 years of learning from each other, we discovered that national healthcare IT systems are complex, they're fragmented. And to succeed, the countries need to work on those 4 important fundamental topics: governance, architecture, people and program management, standards, and interoperability. And we came up with calls to action for each of these items. For governance, we called upon stakeholders, regional and national, to support the leadership of the Ministry of Health in developing national digital health strategies that respond to the needs of universal health coverage, such as person registration, prevention of disease, treatment, rehabilitation. And as the health sector leader, we call upon the Ministry of Health to ensure that they coordinate and they make possible the collaboration of digital health partners and stakeholders within their country. And so on the right, we summarize our call to action as the creation of a multi-sectoral coordination mechanism led by the Ministry of Health. That's our call to action for governance. But then we were asked, how do you navigate this complex system and what do you mean by govern? And so we point our members to the National eHealth Strategy Toolkit, which is a publication of the WHO and ITU way back in 2012, around the same time AeHIN was formed. And we would point them to the 7 components of a national eHealth strategy, with leadership and governance at the top, strategy and investment, legislation, policy and compliance, and workforce as other components, and a vertical stack with infrastructure at the bottom, and on top of the infrastructure, standards and interoperability, and on top of standards and interoperability services and application. We thought that this was a very clear, very simple framework of the important components for successful eHealth programs. And when we drilled down on the toolkit and looked at leadership and governance, the toolkit prescribes a certain structure for the governance structure for eHealth. And they had the health sector providing leadership at the top, supported by a steering committee composed of the principals. And the workhorse would be the core eHealth strategy project team, supported on the left by stakeholder reference and expert advisory groups, and on the right, the broader stakeholders and the general public. So this toolkit was very useful for us at AeHIN. We sort of used it like a Bible. And in fact, the Philippine government almost adopted it in toto with the Department of Health, as we call our ministry, creating a structure that parallels the structure prescribed by the WHO ITU toolkit, with an innovation at the bottom that the Philippine government even created a National eHealth Program Management Office, which resonated well with the people and program management aspect of our Mind the Gaps framework. And if you look at the Philippine National eHealth Framework, it has the same titles and similar to the 7 components of the WHO ITU toolkit. When it comes to architecture, on the left, you will see what we call the Philippine Health Information Exchange. And on the right, the Open Health Information Exchange. And you can see a lot of similarity between these two architectural artifacts. So for AeHIN, digital health governance means creating a multi-sector coordination structure led by the health sector, setting priorities for universal health care, sharing a blueprint that contains priority digital health projects. Some might be with ICT, some might be with the insurance agencies, and some would be with the CRVS agency. Once these projects are defined, we confirm ownership of these key projects. We then ask them to invest on these projects, and we monitor the projects towards success. And to us, governance means making sure the needs of your sector are met, and B, that these different project leaders meet together to coordinate their decisions. And this is where the coordination by the Ministry of Health becomes very important. Our call to action for architecture, realizing that the health sector is very complex, is that there should be a shared blueprint and roadmap so that all stakeholders in the country can understand what is important in terms of digital health in the country. And we recommend 3 things. First, that the Ministry of Health designate an enterprise architect within their structure to oversee this blueprint. But while this internal enterprise architect is learning the ropes, that the government would engage experienced professional and certified enterprise architects to advise them and the development partners on the blueprint formulation. And third, that we would get person in number 1 and the person or the firm in number 2 to be part of the AeHIN Regional Enterprise Architecture Council for Health, which is a pool of enterprise architects knowledgeable about the challenges of the health sector and the interoperability solutions. We're sharing artifacts on how we are doing interoperability within each country and sharing experience. And the enterprise architecture leader in AeHIN is Malaysia. Our call to action for people and program management is that there needs to be multi-sectoral coordination. Consensus building is very important. Interoperability requires close coordination of various projects, often led by multiple departments. Effective program management ensures various stakeholders synchronize their efforts with each other to achieve optimal impacts. Basically, just getting the stakeholders together and synchronizing their activities. And so our call to action is to support the Ministry of Health and strengthen the capacity and capability of their National Digital Health Program Management Team or Office. This includes developing capacity to manage multiple digital health-related projects in partnership with other sectors. For MOH to establish a pool of certified project managers, and for MOH to leverage regional learning networks like AeHIN to catalyze knowledge exchange across countries in the region to facilitate peer learning, sharing, and support. To this end, AeHIN has defined, together with the Asian Development Bank, what we call a convergence workshop, where AeHIN supports the Ministry of Health as the lead organizer, and we invite all the other sectors like the Ministry of ICT, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Education, the private sector, to listen to the strategy and the vision of the Ministry of Health and to offer their support to the very complex digital health infrastructure that needs to be built by the Ministry of Health. And this has been very successful. When the Ministry of Health shows leadership and accountability, the other sectors just, are just raring to pitch in and help out. And so we had our recent convergence workshop in Laos, MOH, again supported by ADB and World Health Organization. Our call to action for standards and interoperability is that we request open access and technical assistance to international health standards like ICD-11 and HL7 FHIR. These health standards are crucial components of the interoperability blueprint, which will enable the availability of health data for better monitoring of population health and understanding of stakeholders within countries and across countries within the region. And to this end, we are encouraging each country to form at least one interoperability lab that the stakeholders can go to so that they can start, testing against each other, whether they can actually exchange data and what they need to do to be able to submit semantically consistent data to the Ministry of Health and to each other. To develop use cases upon the direction of the Ministry of Health and to help the local stakeholders, health and information technology understand how all of these interoperability interfaces work, so to speak. And so final 3 slides, we developed on one side the Regional Enterprise Architecture Council for Health, which are the certified TOGAF in AeHIN. And we formed the Community of Interoperability Labs, which is the collection of all the country interoperability labs to sort of create a symbiotic relationship of architecture and construction and get the juices flowing, so to speak, so that interoperability and health data exchange will happen within each country. And so I summarized this digital health infrastructure as 3 axes, following the UHC box, as the WHO calls it. So in one of their publications, they published this box with 3 axes. The population axis would be the citizens. So there should be a civil registration system in the country that will be the source of the identifier of a citizen. They would have the y-axis would be the services. This would be the providers, the facilities, and the suite of services that are available to each of the citizens. And the third axis would be the cost and the cost distribution of who pays for these providers, these facilities, and these services. So this is like the minimum data element, so to speak, if we want to cover UHC and make sure that we have the right data architecture as we employ digital health interoperability within the country. And if each country follows the same building block, then we can later on put all of these data elements or these boxes on top of each other side by side and form a regional information system amongst ourselves. So again, to summarize, to build the digital health infrastructure, countries should focus on their governance, their architecture, people and program management, standards, and interoperability. And it starts with minding the gaps. And now we shift to actually filling the gaps by creating this network of people who are actually fueling all of this interoperability. So while we are seeking technical solutions to interoperability, in fact, we realized in AeHIN that all of these technological interoperability solutions are probably useless unless we achieve people interoperability. So over the past 10 years, we realized AeHIN is all about people interoperability, and that's what we offer to our region right now. So thank you, Robert, and I'll be happy to answer questions if there are any.
Okay, thank you very much, Alvin. That was a fascinating real-life story about what's happening. Just a second here. I'll just got to get organized here. There we go. I have not seen any questions. So I'll just simply, I'll come up with some questions. I certainly have them. Do you have any problems culturally with people sharing information? I know there's a lot of interoperability, but as we've seen with COVID, nations don't necessarily want to share all the information that they have. Do you have any comments on that and the nation's willingness to share?
It's very common, Robert, the hesitation to share data. And I think it's not just selfishness, but there's some element of fear as well. Some countries with privacy laws would use the privacy law as a reason that, no, I can't share data. In other countries where there are no privacy laws, they might say that government might misuse the data that we are sharing with them. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's a mixed bag of reasons. All of them are valid, by the way. If these are real fears that people and institutions are afraid of, I think they're valid. And so to that point, AeHIN would like to start from the foundations of health data governance. And we had a webinar earlier on, about a month ago, on the health data governance principles, where we agreed that we have to start from a set of principles, the way TOGAF starts with a set of principles. And the principle of protecting the people is very important for us, making sure that the data provides value to healthcare, not to business, but to healthcare, and making sure that the equity is at the center of everything when we share data. I think that's where a lot of the problems with data sharing are coming from, is that there are no principles. So I think we should first start with the principles of data governance, health data governance, and from there gradually work our way to coaxing out all of these stakeholders with large amounts of data that can actually contribute to providing value for health, providing equity, but they don't have yet, the foundations to protect the data, so to speak, on how to de-identify and how to make sure that there is no or a very low risk of re-identifying patients from the de-identified data that they might share. So yes, there is fear of data sharing, there is difficulty, but we also have a group in AeHIN working out on how to build this trust system, and we agreed that we should start with the principles.
I very much like the mind the gap marketing. We have another question with basically, do you have any pushback to an architected approach?
Not a lot, except the very pushback that they've always told us is that it's too tedious. And there are a lot of things that we are asking for, like we ask for an enterprise architect or at least a designated enterprise architect within the Ministry of Health. Of course, many of them there are doctors, public health practitioners, nurses, and administrators. So they were scratching their head when we started to release this call for TOGAF certification training. But you know what, Robert? They passed. These are doctors, nurses. They passed the certification. They got certified. So we knew for a fact that you don't need to be a technology expert to become certified in TOGAF. You just need to know the alignment of business, data application, and technology. So I think they really appreciated TOGAF that way. They do have problems with confidence. Like they thought that the whole digital health system was very complex, and they just finished the course. It doesn't mean that if you're certified TOGAF 9.1 that you will have the whole burden of designing the whole national health blueprint on your shoulders. So that's why we had recommendation number 2, which is look for certified enterprise architects to help you out. You can ask help from the development partners like WHO, ADB, and World Bank to find you these certified professionals or firms that can help you with your national health blueprint. And to further mitigate the risk is that why don't you pull all of them together into a regional group like the Regional Enterprise Architecture Council for Health, so that you know that these artifacts are actually reusable, that you're not being given an artifact that is, where did you get that artifact? Where is that coming from? It's not even coming from the enterprise continuum. So all of these are risk mitigating advice of AeHIN to ourselves and to each other, that we need to have enterprise architecture. We know that we don't have internal capacity, so let's get external people who got certified with a good portfolio, and let's share artifacts so that we know that we are not building proprietary systems in the Philippines that will later on not be able to merge with the data from Malaysia or Thailand. So by having that 1, 2, 3 approach, the individual in the MOH, the external professional firm, and the pool of enterprise architects of 1 and 2, we thought that that would be a promising feature for all governments in the ASEAN region that they might want to tap in case they have any questions about enterprise architecture.
It's a wonderful application of enterprise architecture, and I know I will use that for my students. Go ahead.
Robert, you should join REACH, by the way. I'd like to extend an invitation for you.
Well, thank you very much. That's very kind of you. I'll see whether I can make myself useful as well as ornamental. But I teach multidisciplinary and enterprise architecture. A lot of people, by the time they finish the course, they say, this isn't a technical course, this is a management course, a leadership course, and just shows how pieces fit together.
Right.
And they're very open to it. Well, listen, Alvin, I really would like to thank you very much for your presentation. I do basically will make the presentation, the recording and the presentation available to individuals. So if you could please submit the presentation and make sure it's Creative Commons, because I want to basically, people can use it, but with attribution, which is just common decency. So anyways, thank you very much. And I appreciate your taking the time to present to us. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.